forcefulness of the impression. So he's not talking of statistical probability in that section, but simply of psychological probability, expectation. And he goes at this very, very steadily, and there is one passage on 307 that I think is... he says this, and this seems to reach beyond Hume conceived as a skeptic in a significant way. There is, at the very bottom of 307, there is a kind of pre-established harmony. That's interesting, that's Leibniz's term. There's a kind of pre-established harmony between the course of nature and the succession of our ideas. And though the powers and forces by which the former, nature, is governed, be wholly unknown to us, yet our thoughts and conceptions still, we find, go on in the same train with the other work of nature. Custom is that principle by which this correspondence has been effected. Yeah, we simply adjust by virtue of, repeated behavioral reinforcement. The correspondence has been effected, so necessary to the subsistence of our species and the regulation of our conduct in every circumstance and occurrence of human life. Okay. Custom is then the great guide of life. Now, Joseph Butler, the same general period, end of the 18th century, we'll be talking a little about him next week. Joseph Butler was wrestling likewise with this kind of issue. And he said, and it became sort of a classic dictum in English thought from that time on, probability is the guide of life. Probability is the guide of life. Now you see, Hume isn't satisfied with that. He's not satisfied with that. Yeah, probability helps, but it just reinforces mental habit, you see. It seems that Butler was trying to say that we make choices, decisions about what to affirm, what to deny, and we can be guided in those choices and decisions by the probabilities that we calculate. Not Hume. Not Hume. You don't calculate probabilities, you feel them. You see. It's the feeling that is the guide of life. And he comes back to that on issue after issue, issue after issue. You may have noticed, if you've gotten to the end of the inquiry, that he calls his skepticism a mitigated skepticism. Not absolute, but mitigated. It's mitigated because we do have knowledge of relations of ideas. And so the skepticism is limited to matters of fact. Not to all knowledge, just knowledge of matters of fact. It's applicable then to what is not capable of demonstrative knowledge. And what you cannot demonstrate is facts that are contingent. That is to say, if it's not necessary, logically necessary, but contingent, well, how can you demonstrate that it follows with logical necessity? Yes. The best, you have empirical generalizations which enable you to anticipate. And you have to say enable you to anticipate, because all you know is the uniformities of experience up to this point. You can't affirm the uniformity of nature endlessly into the future with any logical certainty. So Hume's skepticism and his theory of belief And this becomes the basis for whether we can know anything about reality. Yeah?
I have a question about mathematical and other logical. No, I guess I can't say knowledge. Is it knowledge?
Yeah, it is knowledge of its relations of ideas. There are two kinds.
So that is one type. That is the only knowledge that we
Yeah.
have. The rest, basically, the rest is belief.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, you see, mathematics begins with axioms and definitions rather than empirical generalizations.
We do have to believe the axioms.
Well, not if they're axioms. If they're postulates, yes, but not if they're axioms. And he was working in a day when Euclidean geometry was believed to have axiomatic first principles. We don't have non-Euclidean geometries yet. You see. Now, when that arises, this has to change somewhat. Yeah.
Why isn't mathematics bad or so bad?
Because mathematics is dealing with immaterial entities.
But that's still bad.
No, it's dealing with ideas. The idea of 2, the idea of 3, logically together give you the idea of 5. Mathematics, according to Hume, is not about real things. It's about the logical relationships between number concepts, geometrical concepts, so forth.
Well, if you say it's not real, you're saying it's unreal.
No, you're saying that it has to do with ideas. You don't know whether the real world is like that, as a matter of fact.
Well, ideas are part of the real world.
Not in his sense of real, no.
Okay, well then it's real is distinct from.
Real has to do with what has extra-mental reality.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I should add this footnote that you begin to see that there are different views of the status of mathematics and of mathematical entities. You see, Hume is maintaining that mathematics is a purely logical discipline concerned only with logical form, logical relationships. Its entities are simply ideas, nothing more. He's a nominalist in the sense that our mathematical ideas labeled with names, words, do not refer to abstract ideas in the conceptualist sense, nor to real universals in the Platonic sense, but just to collections of similar particulars, that general ideas, that's all. When we get to Kant, we'll see that Kant thinks that mathematics has to do with a realm of abstract ideas. Kant is more the conceptualist, you see. And, of course, you're going to get those who are realists in mathematics as well. And when we get to Whitehead, we'll find that Whitehead is one of those. In other words, you find the 3 major theories about universals applied in the philosophy of mathematics: realism, conceptualism, nominalism. And all 3 of them are represented in philosophy of mathematics today. Any math majors? You run into that a bit in foundations, I think. Foundations of math? Not yet. Okay. Okay, now let's turn our attention, shall we, to the discussion of what there is that we know. And the first case is that of material bodies, things in the external physical world. And this, like the belief in substance, is not something that can be proven. We don't have any cause-effect knowledge. It's something which is simply taken for granted. We assume it. It's a matter of belief. Now, Hume himself seems to believe in the existence of material substances, material bodies, simply because the experience is so steady. Get that impression? Forceful and steady, so consistent, coherent in our experience, that belief is readily elicited. Causal power, I probably don't need to say much more. You'll notice in his chapter on necessity, he points out that we have no knowledge of any causal connection in the mind-body relationship. No knowledge of it in the relationship between God as creator and this earth, this creation, nature. He is, however, inclined to believe that there is causal force, but this is simply a concession to mental habit. We rarely assume that it's there in the material world. He talks a little bit about the occasionalist view that God is the only causal power and so causes everything, and regards that as a belief that's, well, pretty wild. That is to say, there is not any habitual experience that induces such a belief. He doesn't find it particularly forceful. So a more common sense belief in causal power is appropriate. But inasmuch as he refuses to accept the reality of mind as substance, he doesn't have mental causation to talk about, mental causation, and so he is not too inclined to take positively the power of mind over body, even though we habitually talk that way. Liberty and necessity, free will, come into focus. And there are two lines of thought that he has here. One that comes through most clearly in the inquiry is the more simple. Necessary connections, causal necessity, we don't know. All we know is constant conjunction. So the person who is a necessitarian and says that all human choices and actions are causally determined